Hello, good morning. I just want to thank you all for being here today. My name is Elizabeth Esquivel. I'm the Assistant Executive Director of Government Relations, and we are so excited to have you here to join us for our transportation webinar. Today, we're going to be covering SB 88 by Senator Skinner that has to do with bus driver qualifications, and AB 579 that has to do with zero-emission school buses. And so I just want to welcome you here today. We're going to go ahead and start with SB 88 by Senator Skinner. And we have Megan Kerry here with us. She is the Chief Development Officer for EverDriven. And we also have Cristian Lepe from Mount Diablo Unified School District. And we are excited to welcome them as our presenters today. I'll go ahead and let them take the lead.
Awesome. Thank you, Elizabeth. I'm going to go ahead and pull up my presentation here. Get it into presentation mode. Just want to say thank you, first of all, for having us, and something I'm very passionate. Just to clarify, though, this is actually for alternative student transportation, so smaller vehicles, not actually the buses, but still drivers that are transporting kids to and from school. So this is something that this, obviously, SB 88 is a bill that was just passed here recently, as you mentioned, by Skinner, and something that I think a lot of us in the transportation and school industry are actually really looking forward to. We're going to go through kind of the who, the what, the when, the where, the why, and then also kind of get into a little bit more of the details of what this actually means in terms of, driver qualifications, vehicle qualifications, as well as compliance from companies. So with that, I'm just going to go ahead and get kind of straight into it. So this bill that was passed just here, like I mentioned a few months ago, really is to kind of come up with, I guess the best way to put it is kind of common sense safety standards for these alternative vehicles. So it's defined as, it says 10 or fewer on here, but it's actually 8 or fewer, including the driver. So think minivans, sedans, SUVs, multiple types of vehicles, but it's really putting more qualifications on, and what we kind of call these common sense qualifications on these drivers. Up until this point, there's been a lot of differences, and then different types of companies operating different ways. So like most states have these common sense safety standards, California has now implemented that as well. And just as a little back end, I kind of skipped over myself, but Megan Kerry, as Elizabeth mentioned, here from EverDriven, but more importantly, I've been in the school transportation industry here in California for the last 16 years. So, and really only working in the alternative space. So while I say everybody else is doing a lot of the big busing, we here at EverDriven have been focused on this alternative. So for us, we're really happy to see this bill pass to kind of put, more safety requirements, quite frankly, for the most vulnerable kiddos in our communities that are being transported typically in these smaller capacity vehicles. So special education kiddos, McKinney-Vento kiddos, and foster youth. So with that, kind of the why. So I mentioned that there's been a multitude of multiple different companies that are operating under kind of different agencies. So just kind of especially more in the recent years, which is why they decided to kind of put this regulation up. And there really was essentially no regulation up until this point. If you're working, whether it's DOE, PUC, there's only a couple specific requirements that were out there. So it was really putting more wholesome approach to, what are all those safety requirements? I would say mirroring kind of what CDL requirements are, without CDL requirements, because we're not driving behind the wheel of a big bus. So still looking at it from a driver standpoint, vehicle standpoint. And really it was due to kind of it was unregulated, whether it was, again, through the PUC, with TNCs, which are transportation network companies, and even on if you're just quote unquote looking, alternative transport. For the health and safety of the pupils or the kiddos that we're transporting, it was really to make sure that this applies to all drivers, anyone that's driving kids to or from school. It was updated. Hold on a second. Sorry, trying to get this thing out of my way. To make sure that is so this really qualifies for any drivers that are driving for a company but also for any drivers that are employed by an LEA. So that are providing that home to school transportation. So contractors or LEAs. So the three components that we'll get into here are, as I mentioned, the vehicle requirements, driver requirements, and then company and or vendor requirements. At the end, I'm also going to go through some risk mitigations and timelines, as well as some resources that you as districts have as well. So for the vehicle requirements, as I mentioned, this is really 8 or fewer passengers, excluding the driver. Only street legal coupes, sedans, light duty vehicles, minivans, sport utilities, you name it, pickup trucks. I don't know anyone that's doing pickup trucks, but it's still labeled, it's still in the bill. Also, so there's a couple of requirements specifically on the vehicles that are pointed out that they should have a vehicle inspection every 12 months or every 50,000 miles, whichever comes first. And then they put some additional safety requirements, again, that kind of mirror that bus. They want you to also have a fire extinguisher in those vehicles and first aid kits. I should note there was a lot of iterations out there of this bill. There's a lot of requirements that were in and taken out or not in originally that were put in. So this is what the final bill ended up being. And I know there was a ton of different iterations, but at the end, this bill really came out just looking at safety for the kiddos and the vehicles that they're in. So it really, think about this bill as really just a safety bill. For driver requirements, this is much more extensive, as you can imagine. So not only holding a driver's license, which again, standard, you should have that anyways, but also 18 years of age. They must actually pass a criminal background check, fingerprinting clearance, obviously, which is a California statute here. And then they must have a satisfactory driving record. With no disqualifications. So the company needs to make sure that they have a report that's current in public record. And then they must, the drivers must have not have demonstrated irrational behavior. So obviously putting kiddos in these vehicles, we need to make sure that we're understanding their driver behaviors. They're also, this is a real big one, and I'll kind of get into a little bit of the differences here, but they're subject to comply with drug and alcohol testing. This is a big one that was not there before, but is something, you know, we have had as a standard as a company. And I think it's actually really important, again, kind of mirroring the CDL. We all know that the CDL driver has to go through and be a part of the clearinghouse. Well, and actually in one of the bills, it originally did, in this bill originally, it did say that it should be part of the clearinghouse. Well, if you're not a CDL holder, you can't be part of the clearinghouse. So there is other PUC approved consortiums that you can actually work through. So districts can work through it, contractors can work through it, and they're all are listed out there very nicely for everyone to see where you can put those drivers through. So it's doing things, you know, pre-employment, post-accident, reasonable suspicion, all of that, which is extremely important this day and age. Also, they have to complete a medical exam that's no more than 2 years prior to performing the transportation, and then every 2 years after. And then for drivers that are at 65 or above, they have to have one annually and have to submit that annually. Now, I mentioned the 2 types of drug and alcohol policies, and I think this is a good one. I had a lot of questions. We've had a lot of questions around this one, which I think it's a good one to kind of get into. So there's a lot of differences. I think there's a lot of confusion out there of what, you know, proactive versus reactive. There's a zero tolerance policy. So a zero tolerance policy for a company can mean, and or a district can mean, obviously, that you have zero tolerance. Well, the difference there is it a proactive or a reactive zero tolerance policy? So a zero tolerance policy at face value itself is basically saying, hey, you know, we don't want you to do drugs or have alcohol in that vehicle or be driving under the influence in any way, shape, or form. But that's not necessarily testing, and that's not having ongoing testing throughout the service period. It's a very reactive measure. So saying having a zero tolerance policy is great, and everyone should have one for sure. There is the proactive part of making sure that, you know, now with this bill, they have to be a part of a drug and alcohol consortium that does do the pre-employment, post-accident, random, and reasonable suspicion. So it's a good nuance to kind of clarify a little bit, but it's a big one, and one that ultimately is extremely important.
Megan, we do have a question in the chat. It says,
Okay.
is this only for home to school, or does it include activity transportation as well?
Yeah, and I was looking that up in our assembly bill, and it looks like it's anybody who provides transportation services for pupils in a vehicle. So it does not specify if it's home to school. So I would probably venture to say that it's any time that you're transportating any of our students, either to an activity or home to school. They're really mirroring what we do as a transportation department for school districts. So I would probably be safe to say that anytime. So I did see that question. I was looking that up to clarify that.
Great,
Yes,
thank you.
thank you. And I think that's the whole point too, to make sure that there is
Consistent.
some parameters and some consistency around outside home to school transportation activities.
Yeah, I think what we really need, and I'm sorry to break this up, Megan, but what we really need to understand is that we are trying, or this bill is trying to hold these transportation companies accountable and at the same level as what we do as a school district department of transportation. So
Another question we have here is, does this apply to certificate staff members? We have a lot of teachers who drive staff.
so it would be in the district's best interest to do this, because it is a huge liability for our districts not to. We want to know who's transporting our students. I don't think that this particularly applies to it because it is for outside vendors. But in your district, you should be doing this. It is best practice to do that. Is anyone who is transporting our kiddos should be fingerprinted, background, pull notices, and possibly be in a clearinghouse as well.
Another question we have here is, who pays for the physical for a driver who is not a regular bus driver?
It's probably
It would
gonna,
be up to that company.
yeah, that's probably going to be that company. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, no, they may add something into your contract, but like for payment, I mean, I haven't seen that yet, but they could. I don't know if they're going to try and group that a different way.
Yeah. Christina's question is, as a volunteer driver for a chaperone, you probably want to hold them responsible the same way. And I don't know if that is the best way to transport our students. And I'm just going to leave it with, everyone is happy until they're not happy, right? And even though it's a volunteer, they're not being paid. If there's an accident, who is going to hold liability in that case? So unfortunately, in transportation, we have to think of worst case scenario and what are the lawyers going to say? So.
And the other question we have here from Peter is, what about school districts that utilize their instructional aides to transport students during the school day in vans?
It's the same thing. They should be at the same standard. Best practices to do that. This bill doesn't, this bill is not for them. Your district should have these practices in place already.
Great.
So I hope
Thank
that.
you.
No problem. And I'm glad that Christian's watching the questions, because I am not. I am trying to still in the presentation mode, so I appreciate it.
I'll do this.
Okay, great. Perfect. So a few more of the requirements. This one's been a standard even before TB test. Need to submit and have a clear TB test. Also, there's some provisions in there, should not drive more than 10 hours within a work period. They also, and this is another big one that I think is really, really important to kind of capture, completing an initial training and then subsequent required trainings for these drivers. And again, pre-trip vehicle inspections, really you know, similar to what we're doing on the bus side. Safe loading and unloading practices, which again, a big deal, making sure that we're knowing how the kids are getting in and out of the vehicle, that the drivers are well aware that they're being trained on that, you know, locking the doors, things like that. What are safe practices that we should be doing if we're in these smaller vehicles? Proper use of seatbelts, child safety restraints. They are not the same ones always as what you're transporting on a bus. Some of them are specific to the smaller capacities. So knowing and understanding that we're really transporting with the right child safety restraints is extremely important. Handling accidents, incidents, and emergency situations. So the drivers should not only be trained on it, but as you'll see later, the companies should also be really identifying what those processes and procedures are for you as a district. Providing proper accommodations for pupils with disabilities. Disability training, I think, is extremely important, especially if, you know, I always say when we're transporting these smaller capacity vehicles and doing this for the last 16 years, I will tell you the majority of the kiddos that we're transporting are students that have disabilities. So these drivers should be aware and should be trained properly on how to work with these kiddos, and knowing that if they're going to be transporting a student that has autism, what does that exactly mean? How should communication happen? What might make that kiddo more comfortable? Is music good or is it not good? So there's a lot of different parts that go into kind of the disability training as well. Providing obviously proper accommodations for students with disabilities. Defensive driving, which again, very similar to what we're doing on the bus end. Operations in inclement weather. I kind of laugh because we're in California, but different parts of California, there is inclement weather, depending on. And then obviously operations at night or with impaired visibility conditions. And that's not the end of driver requirements, because this is where obviously we got the bulk of the bill. Maintaining a daily log sheet with the pre-trip vehicle inspections. I would say, again, another good practice is what is their post-trip vehicle inspection as well. Remember, we always talk about no child left on the bus. What are they doing to ensure that there's no child left on the vehicle? Is there, and that's not part of the bill, but just food for thought, and it's something that I talk about often. Completing training equivalent to the American Red Cross, so first aid training. They don't have to be an actual certificate holder, but they have to have training or go through some type of program. Now, company and LEA requirements. So they have to make an attestation to the following. So they basically have to say, hey, we are going to be following and abiding by all laws, all regulations. They have to attest to you, the district, that they will be basically filing that they will have everything on file. They will be compliant. They're going to keep documentation of compliance. And I think this is a key point that you as a district should be also checking that from time to time. I always say trust, but verify. I think it's extremely important. And there are some tools out there to kind of help you do that as well. Additional items to note, a third party. So in some states, there's actual requirements that they come in and do audits. So the Department of Education does audits. That is not part of this bill, just to clarify. They can come in and do an audit, but that it basically has to, there has to be someone that's saying, hey, like, we don't think that this company or someone's in compliance, and we're asking that LEA for you know, what is their compliance. So they can kind of come in and do an audit and to see, just basically hold accountable. And that's any third party can actually call that out. Now, they do have to have substantial documentation in order to do that. So it'll be interesting. I know there's a lot of questions on the transportation call that we had recently about that. I don't know how that's all going to work out. I would say if there's any questions about that one, I'd probably go to the Department of Education. Again, I'm kind of going through what the bill is, but they're a wealth of knowledge over at the Department of Education. They were great on this entire bill.
Sorry, Megan, before you move on, there is another question that we have on here. And does that mean that there is a hard cap on district employees once they hit 40 hours? Then does the bill apply to them, even if 1 and 2 is met?
Yeah, and I'm reading that.
I think it's in a 1 day. Isn't that, Cristian? I think it's the 10 hours in a day that they can't be working more than. Well, it's not in a week.
Yeah, I don't know if this is in a week. It just does 40 hours. I'm reading what Greg Taylor has written on there as well. And I would say our participants should probably read that as well, because it's great information. says 40 hours per year is what Philip Tarver wrote on there. So yeah, 40 hours per school year. So it's not in a day, it's in the school year. Yeah, you're answering your questions there. A great information. Again, all of this is new to all of us, and it's going to have its nuances where we're going to have to weave in and out of. But I see where even James Lopez brought up a good one where the bill says the bill applies to the above mentioned provisions of all drivers employed by a local education agency. So I believe what Greg is writing on there, or Philip, is we're talking about people who volunteer, correct? It's probably the answer there. So.
Yeah, and I think before going on to the timelines, I do want to say that a big part of the negotiation process, and I have to say that Senator Nancy Skinner, she's the chair of the Senate Budget Education or Senate Budget Committee. That's a very, very influential position to be in. And so we were able to get this time frame pushed back to 2025 because it would have been really hard to go into effect come January 1st of 2024. So that was one of the big compromises that we were able to get.
Yeah, and we've had a lot of questions on that. I think there's a lot of districts that are thinking that this has to apply by January 1st. So just as a company, we fielded a lot of questions. And that's not to say that some companies and some contracts are written already in compliance. There are several of those, just as a heads up. So just kind of understanding and knowing what your requirements currently are in your existing contract if you have one. And then, and if you want to go back and negotiate with a company, like obviously any district can do that as well. That's something we'll get into in risk mitigation here in a few minutes as well. But as Elizabeth just mentioned, the actual compliance date is July 1 of 2025. So a lot of time to get up to speed there.
All right, and all great questions and great comments, guys. So we welcome all that. By asking those questions or making the comments, it opens up our eyes and where we need to look so that we are fully fluent in this, and that way no one gets caught off guard on any of this. So
I'll just throw in on the legislative point, if there's any opportunity to maybe help provide some additional clarification, there's still opportunity to do that with this upcoming year. So I really appreciate all the questions, all the comments that are being made. And again, if there's any specific clarification that needs to be made for this bill, we're more than happy to bring that forward.
Yeah.
Awesome. So some of the questions that have been asked over the last few months with this is kind of, well, for districts that do want to have this and be in effect sooner than later, kind of what are some of those risk mitigations between now and July 1 of 2025? So some of the things that I would say to dive into, understand, obviously, know your contract, know the qualifications, know, currently what they're doing. Require those proactive vetting standards. On the process, if you're bringing on a new vendor between now and then, you could put SB 88 requirements in it, so you're not worrying about compliance. If you have a new RFP that you're putting out, or if you're working with a new company, I would approach it from that way. It's just being in compliance from the get-go. And then know what your vendor does and does not do currently. So not only what's in your contract, but what they are currently doing is a standard for a company. And then verify. Again, that trust but verify, I think, goes a very long way, because if you want to go and do an audit, say, hey, I would like to see, pull up 20 drivers. These are the 20 drivers that are working. Can I audit 2 of them or 5 of them? I always say doing an audit really will kind of open your eyes and, again, give you that reassurance and confidence of what they're currently doing. And then obviously that's the same as for periodic oversight. And then actually that is it. We're at the end. DOE, like I mentioned before, is a great resource. They've been a great resource through this entire process. I know that a lot of districts have reached out there too. So, and that's all I have.
And I see that we have great questions and great conversations happening in the questions and answers. So We want to keep these going. We want to continue to have these conversations because I may not catch something that one of you guys will catch, and it's great to ask those questions and make the comments. So then our CASBO group can take those to the groups and get the answers for you, or clarification where we need it. So,
Are there any other final questions for Megan? I don't think I see. Yes, so just for anyone that joined a little bit later, we will be providing a copy of the slides.
yeah, and this is great to have for your own, as well as you're doing your homework and your due diligence on this bill, because we are also going to be the ones that have to bring this to our districts, to our boards, to our superintendents, CBOs, whoever you report to. And again, it's becoming a student of the business, where the business is school transportation. And these are the, we do rules and regulations. That's what we live by, right, guys? So if you take this copy here, I'm sure Megan will allow you to present it in your board as yours, copy and paste it, make it yours, add to whatever you need to add, so you can bring this to your boards of education, and then just let them know what's happening, that you're keeping up to date on these bills. So.
And also, I'll send this over, Elizabeth, too, as well as I saw a paper come out from Capital Advisors recently on SB 88 that goes through this exact same stuff. So there's a couple different versions of it if you guys would like.
Right. And also there's an email there, guys, to email govrelations@casbo.org. So James is making a clarification. 40 hours is a year thing, are 2 qualifications to use that. So that was speaking to the 40 hours that the bill applies. So those are all great questions, comments. Right. Yeah, James. Greg. No, I think it's Greg wrote that in the questions and answers, or Philip did. Philip Tarver. Great information, Philip and Greg.
Well, thank you so much, Megan. We really appreciate your expertise. And then Cristian, you being able to jump in from that school district perspective, really appreciate it. We're gonna now transition over to AB 579 by Assemblymember Ting. That has to do with zero-emission school buses. And then I'll go ahead and pull up my screen to share a PowerPoint presentation. Grant, thank you so much for joining us as our co-presenter. Lindsay Unified School District, doing a lot of wonderful work. I know, Grant, you've been doing a lot of work on this bill since last year. And so I'll go ahead and share my screen. I think, is it sharing?
Not in presentation mode yet, but
Is it? No? Can you see it?
yeah, that's good. That'll work.
Perfect.
Well, good morning, everybody. Glad to see you here. So compared to SB 88, AB 579 is piece of cake. It's pretty straightforward. It's not as complicated as that one. And this has to do with the big 2035 date. So I was involved in this legislation as far as trying to oppose it. So don't blame me for this one. But this is the law now. This was actually introduced last year and it did not make it through. But then they tried again, and it did make it through this year. So it's a pretty simple bill. It requires all newly purchased or contracted school buses. So this doesn't mean your entire fleet has to be electric in 2035. It just means anything you purchase from 2035 on has to be zero emissions. So you can still have your diesel buses if you've purchased them prior to that date. So there's a big misconception with that. There are some opportunities to extend that. So if you can prove, if you're a frontier school, which is a school that's 600 kids or less, or in a county with population density fewer than 10 persons per square mile, this was trying to address some of those mountainous, very small school districts who were saying that electric buses won't work. You don't have to, you have till 2040, and then you have a annual extension through 2045 if you can show the certain criteria that it's not feasible. And the next slide. So it is important to see the governor's message on this. So he doesn't often do a signing message, but on this one he did, talking about the need to move towards zero emission. And essentially what this bill does is this bill is, and I'll read what it says in the legislation. The very end, it says this bill, where is it? Oh, it is the intent of the legislator to codify a timeline for school bus electrification that sets a clear deadline for school bus fleet transition. So essentially what this bill is doing is setting a timeline, 2035. There's no funding attached to this bill, which is a problem, but it's really setting a timeline of 2035 and putting that in legislation. It is also important to note the fiscal impact. The Senate Appropriations Committee analysis at the time estimated the total cost to replace the entire fleet of school buses in the state of a little over $5.5 billion. While we're talking about money, this last budget cycle, there was initially $1.5 billion budgeted for electrification of school buses. $1 billion of that was delayed. And now, given the new data we've got from the state, we'll see if there's any funding towards this. Right now, it's mostly grants and other stuff outside of the state budget for funding this.
Yeah, and I just really want to reiterate what Grant was saying right now. The governor doesn't usually do signing messages. And so when it does, it has to do with a caveat in terms of making sure that there's an understanding. If you sign this, he's signing this bill, and here's what I have to say about it. He does do veto messages for every bill that he decides to veto. And he explains why, but again, like Grant said, very rarely do you see a signing message, but here he is really saying that he wants to encourage the future legislature and the administration to figure out what the technology is going to look like moving forward. And we know that he's not going to be governor come 2035. And so he wants to make sure that he's expressing that message.
Exactly. And then the last, I think it's the last slide. Again, this is very, very straightforward. There are opportunities for non-frontier schools to apply for extensions as well. So you can do up to 5 years if you can show the following. So one, you can reasonably demonstrate that the daily planned bus route for transporting pupils to and from school cannot be serviced through available zero-emission technology. And the Air Resources Board, in consultation with the Department of State Energy Resource Conservation Development, receives and evaluates a local request. So the request has to go to that agency, and they have to concur with what you're saying. What this doesn't address is field trips and things like that. I don't think you can't say, hey, we can't go on field trips. This is only talking about to and from school servicing. And I know that was a big concern of a lot of school districts, is how are we going to take these kids outside of our geographic area on trips if the infrastructure is not there. I was on several meetings with proponents of this bill, other agencies that are pushing for this bill. And the big argument there was, oh, by 2035, the technology will be there. And if we don't set a date, then we're not really going to incentivize the industry to push as hard as they otherwise would have. That is an argument, whether you agree with it or not. That was kind of some of the reason this bill was pushed forward, is to really set that date. Another big unknown is, although it doesn't happen until 2035, what is this going to do to the manufacturers? So you can technically purchase a diesel bus, for example, up to 2035, but will they even be available? Because how many manufacturers are going to be making them for California standards when they know that the industry is moving away from that? So that's a big what if. In Lindsay, we have a fleet of 9 buses. We've purchased 4 diesel buses over the last year, just to make sure we have them for the future, as preventative, because right now we don't have a zero-emission bus. We have 2, but they're good for home to school transportation for about 100 miles right now. They can't take them on field trips. Other than that, I don't see any questions. Again, it's a pretty straightforward bill. It's really setting that date for 2035 for multiple reasons.
And just as some background, this really is very consistent with the governor in trying to move to zero emission, clean energy, climate change. He did an executive order a couple of years ago, or just over a year ago. So very consistent with what his plan is moving forward. I don't know if you have anything to add, Cristian, from your perspective.
Well, I've been a early adopter of electric school buses in our district. We have a fleet of 112 buses, and I have 19 electric buses ranging from cutaways to transits to conventionals. So I know that it is an issue with range and also reliability. I am not going to hide that. But as Grant has said, if we don't set a date and we allow the manufacturers to hit their goal, and we tell them that we want higher mileage out of our fleet or our electric buses, they're not going to give it to us, right? You can see what the auto industry is doing with electric vehicles as well. We just had a Cybertruck come out right now that's 340 miles. You can buy an extra battery pack for it, but we're talking about a school bus, right? And we're seeing right now is about 100 miles. I know that has been our biggest question for our manufacturers is, when are you going to give us a bus that has higher mileage or higher range to be able to do these field trips? So I know that's everyone's concern, and we think about these things, especially when a bill like this comes out, right?
It's not just that, it's the infrastructure to charge as well. Right now you have it for very nice for Teslas and things like that, but for buses, there's no infrastructure out there to be able to get from San Francisco to LA if you needed to with a bus.
Correct. And unless you get the early adopters like myself, and I tell anybody that is in the Concord area, the Bay Area, if you need a charge, my yard is open to you. But it is true. It is an issue. So
we do have a question in the chat. Is there a regulation in California starting January 2024 restricting the purchase of EV and combustion engine buses to 1-to-1 ratio, or is this not true?
I haven't heard that before.
I haven't heard that either.
I'm not sure. That is true. I want to know more about it.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Like I said, we're purchasing 4 diesel buses and we have 2 electric, so that would be an issue.
Yeah, that would be an issue. And I know that even speaking with, our supplier or a vendor for our buses, Cummins is getting out of the diesel engine industry. So those diesel buses are they're becoming harder to come by. So that's an issue there. It looks as if the industry is like I've said, going headfirst into this, and hopefully they can do that. One question: will the bill address the weight issue of the electric school buses, notwithstanding the maximum? Oh, somebody moved something there. Maximum gross weight of any one axle of a bus shall not exceed 20,500 pounds. Front axles are typically 14,000 pounds, or gross vehicle weight 34,500 max. 2,800 school bus can only carry 53 passengers despite having room for 84 passengers. Yeah, I know you brought this question to our group, James, and I didn't get chance to do homework on that. I wish I would have gotten that answer or that question yesterday. We had our CHP inspector out inspecting our buses, but I can reach out to them on this and see if we can get an answer on it. Matter of fact, I'm going to take a picture of it.
And we want to leave some time for Emily to show us, give us some ideas on where funding might be available for these as well. So we'll make sure we leave enough time.
Yeah. Thank you, Grant. If there aren't any other questions, I think it's really important to make sure that with the delay in the $1 billion of the Proposition 98 funding that was put in this year's budget, that if we still have to abide by this regulation, that we understand what kind of grant funding is available. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Emily now.
Thank you,
And she's-
Elizabeth. Yes, good morning. I'll be sharing my screen in just a moment.
Thank you. And Emily's program manager for CALSTART.
Okay. Okay, and can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great.
And thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Of course, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having us. So my name is Emily Casca. I'm a project manager for CALSTART. We do have several different projects that fund electric vehicles and infrastructure as well for the chargers. So there are several, but I did want to start with one here. The HVIP public school bus set aside and energy infrastructure incentives for zero-emission commercial vehicles project, or in other words, Energize joint application. So this one is a project that you can apply to. There's just one application, and essentially it'll cover the cost for the electric school bus as well as the infrastructure. Voucher amounts in the public school bus set aside intend to cover nearly, if not all, the full cost of a new zero-emission school bus. This application will close on December 15, so we do still have time if you're interested in applying. And the vouchers for the public school bus set aside may cover taxes and fees as well related to the purchase of the eligible vehicle. Here to the left, you can see the maximum voucher amounts. So we have them here, like for example, type A, you have 285,000, and there will be an additional 25,000 if you have a wheelchair lift on the new electric school bus. This is a scrappage type program, so essentially you would apply and enter a 2010 model year school bus, and you would scrap that for a brand new electric school bus. And that's why the voucher amounts for this project specifically is a lot higher than others that you see right now. I'll go over to the next slide. And I'll be dropping the links here, and I know Elizabeth and others have mentioned that we'll be sharing these slides later on, but I'll also drop them on the chat here. One key website here that I would like to share is the californiahvip.org/purchasers/hashtag school bus. So this here will have all of the other items, which is the joint application itself. There's preliminary information that you'll add on the infrastructure side if you already have infrastructure, if you're looking to expand, or if you don't have infrastructure. We really don't need all for you to be further out with the infrastructure side. We would definitely like to assist you. We have different technical assistance resources for you all. And then on the electric school bus side, it would just be the information of the electric school bus. We also have the application guidance. So it gives you, this form here gives you information on how to apply for the project, basically what the scope is. There's different milestones that you'll have to meet. So it's just very transparent on what is needed throughout the project cycle. A letter of intent will also be needed by the school board. And then also want to share the DGS statewide procurement contract, which can be matched with this project as well. So that way you can minimize the cost that it would take to get a new electric school bus. And lastly, we'd definitely like for you to reach out to us at any time. Our email is schoolbusteam@calstart.org. So if you have any questions, any technical questions, or any questions programmatically about this program, definitely reach out to us. And just to conclude here, we also have this last resource. It's called Electric School Bus Network. So we will have one shortly at 11 a.m. today, where we will discuss vehicle to grid, so charging the electric school bus with the charger itself, and as well as from the grid. So this is something that's coming up soon. Essentially, it's like bidirectional, where you charge the school bus, or you the energy that it has in the battery escapes into the grid, and you get incentives for that as well. So the electric school bus network accelerates nationwide school bus fleet electrification through peer-to-peer networking and dialogue-driven forum meetings for school districts, advocacy, and government organizations and industry representatives. The electric school bus network provides access to educational tools, resources, and subject matter experts to help support the electric school bus fleet transition. So if you'd like to join us anytime, we do have these meetings every other month. This month we will have San Diego Unified School District, we'll have San Diego Gas and Electric, and Nuvve, who is a charger OEM or manufacturer for bidirectional chargers, which are vehicle to grid, as well as just level 2 chargers. Those are more of a lighter duty as far as like energy, providing energy to the school bus. That is a bit lighter. And then the more like heavy duty as well, that would be DC fast chargers. So that way you can charge the vehicle much quicker. So yeah, Nuvve provides different chargers across the board, and they'll be joining us as well to discuss the vehicle to grid components. But definitely reach out to us if you have any questions. I'll go back up to this slide here so you can see.
Emily, we do have a question in the chat.
Yeah.
Someone said we use First Student to bus our students. They're applying for the Clean School Bus Rebate, and they asked us as a partner district, can we apply for this grant?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, you can apply for this grant. There are some components, such as if you're a small or medium air district. So there are some things that we'll have to review. If you'd like to, I can drop my information here as well, so we can chat about those requirements and see if we meet those. And we'd be happy to help you apply for the program.
Great. Well, if there are no other questions, just want to thank you all again for joining us today in our transportation implementation webinar. Thank you to our guest presenters. Really appreciate your insight. Reach out to us if you have any questions, and we're going to go ahead and make sure that the slides get sent out.
I believe there was one more question for.
Okay.
Does the electric bus have to be like for like?
No. Yeah, it does not. And so just drop the school bus website here, and also would like to share the email. Again, my name is Emily, project manager, and I'd be happy to help you all. Thank you for having me, Elizabeth and team.
Of course. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.